Right friends, welcome back to editorial discussion. Today there are 5 important issues, one pertaining to the community management of flood embankments, an important and interesting proposal, that is one issue. Second one is whether the dependence on fossil fuels will reduce or not by mid-century because of the projections of electricity consumption by 2050. So, these two are important issues. One is lead article in the Hindu, which pertains to the BRICS summit, which is going to take place next month. As usual, Mumbai floods, and the next one is with regard to soft Brexit or hard Brexit. So, these things we are going to deliberate in detail. The first one is with regard to Mumbai floods. In fact, in the year 2005, there was more than 90 centimeters of rainfall, and now in a single day the rainfall was more than 30 centimeters. That means in 2005, which caused widespread damage, the rainfall was more than 90 centimeters in a single day, and now it is more than 30 centimeters. Now the destruction or the loss of lives are considerably reduced, but still a lot more lessons to be learnt from 2005 floods. And here encroachments in flood plains, wetlands, destruction of wetlands, destruction of natural water channels, destruction or encroachments in lakes, all these things, as well as poor regulation in urban areas. Because of all these reasons, it is causing misery in the urban areas. Discuss. So, encroachments in floodplains, wetlands, lakes and destruction of natural water channels due to poor regulation is causing misery in urban areas. Discuss. As per one news report, India is one of the most flood prone countries in the world. Almost 11 crore people, or you can say around 8 to 10% of the population, are vulnerable to floods. According to UN report, India's average annual economic loss due to disasters is around $10 billion, out of which more than $7 billion is due to floods alone. Leave this apart, and if you look at the most important aspect, the main problem in India, you can give these examples because these are taken from Times of India lead article. Urban ecosystems comprising marshlands, wetlands, lakes and rivers, they can reduce the incident of floods, they can reduce the incidence of floods because they will act as natural absorbers, and they were steadily deteriorated in our country. The reason being encroachments, illegal constructions in flood prone areas, then indiscriminate destruction of green areas. All these things reduced the resilience of cities, and subsequently these are causing serious flooding. Whatever the city you take, the same story. It may be Gurugram, it may be Bengaluru, it may be Hyderabad, it may be Mumbai, the same story. You see the case of Bengaluru. Bengaluru was the city with the 2500 lakes. At the same time, it had an efficient storm water drainage system of interconnected lakes. Bengaluru has got, not now, good olden days, Bengaluru had got excellent system of interconnection of lakes, 2500 lakes, and they are interconnected. If there is more water in one particular lake, that used to flow to the second lake, and with the encroachments and solid waste blocking the natural channels, the flood waters cannot flow to the next water body. You see, in Hyderabad, 375 lakes were extinct, they were no more in existence. If you look at Delhi, 274 water bodies have dried up, and in Gurugram, many of the residential areas are not connected to any drainage system. Gurugram is the most unregulated city which does not have connection to any drainage system. This is the case of several residents in Gurugram, which is next door to Delhi, right. So, this is the same story wherever you see, and Mumbai has got bad experience of 2005 when more than 99 centimeters of rainfall occurred on a single day, and almost you can say a decade of inaction. The state and civic authorities consequently undertook a series of projects, but they could not be completed, they were abandoned midway. The most important one is to implement the Bruhan Mumbai storm water drainage. Lot many resources were sent after 2005 floods on measures such as standard operation protocol, that is also required. No one can deny that. Disaster management units must have standard operation protocol. They have also improved better disaster cells and control rooms, and now better forecasting of rains or floods is also possible, and improvements have done in these areas. Probably this may be one reason why the deaths are less this time. But if you see the aspects pertaining to construction of detention basins for flood water, by removing the encroachments, detention basins for flood water are to be constructed. Then demarcation of flood prone zones on the development plan sheets. That means when city is to be developed, then the flood plain areas, or you can say flood prone areas, are to be earmarked, and these important aspects were not taken up. At the same time, an initiative to prepare contour maps, that means in case of heavy rainfall, where the water move, where are the low lying areas, where are the high areas, that is indicated with contour maps, and that could not be completed unfortunately. So, whenever you are writing about any particular question pertaining to the urban realities which is resulting into floods in city after city, you can take them as examples. So, I have taken these things from 2-3 newspapers today. The central system to advise all agencies on planning for the days of abnormally heavy rainfall were never undertaken. There were several failures for the past 10 years. Major roads and traffic junctions, normally major roads as well as traffic junctions must be designed for the drainage systems capable of tackling floods in once in 100 years possibility, and that was not undertaken. And one of the key recommendations after 2005 floods was to restore degraded rivers and river banks. In fact, this city has got 4 rivers, and in some of the places the width of the river is only 2 meters or 3 meters. The city of Mumbai, please look into this. Mithi river, this runs for 18 kilometers, Dahisar river about 12 kilometers, then Poisar, Oshiwara, they run for nearly 7 kilometers each, and at most of the locations they are not visible. At some of the locations there are just 2 to 3 meters width. So, extensive encroachments reduced their width to barely a couple of meters, and each of these river is now little more than a 2 meters width, or you can say it is little more than a mother drain for suburban nallas. So, these rivers became just mother drains for suburban nallas because of encroachments, because of destruction of wetlands, because of destruction of floodplains. All these things happened because of poor regulation. So, frankly speaking, there is no solution for the existing cities unless massive steps are taken to remove the encroachments and to make the regular water channels or natural water channels free. Right? What needs to be done? You have to eliminate all the aspects whatever we have discussed. That is most important aspect. Stringent regulation, removal of encroachments, protect the natural water lanes. All these things are immediate need of the hour. In addition to that, some more additions are given here as per the newspaper. Contour maps should be prepared in a scientific way for each and every city in our country. Restoration of the natural water channels. Then new constructions can be on stilts. That means some structure at the bottom that will not take, that is left to take care of floods. That means the buildings must be constructed at higher elevation over stilts. Then retrofitting of houses to locate electrical installations high above can be one option. So, these are minor things, but major things are whatever we have discussed for the past 10 minutes, those are to be taken out. The second article here I would like to throw some light on what is the single market, what is customs union, what is the soft Brexit, what is hard Brexit. So, to explain these things I have taken this article. There are news reports that Labour Party announced that they would like to go for European single market for some more time. That means the parties are now in favor of soft Brexit. Initially, some of the parties, some of the experts felt that hard Brexit is better, so that the United Kingdom can show its economic might and United Kingdom can establish its authority as a powerful nation. So, some of the voters voted for hard Brexit previously, but now several people are looking at the soft Brexit. Now, before going ahead, what is the difference between free trade area and single market? European Union is classic example of single market. Now, in our country, GST is termed as in fact single market in our country. What is the meaning of single market? You see, previously before GST, several barriers are there. When the truck was used to pass from one state to another state at a check post, it used to be detained for 5-6 hours. Now it is no more. So, here single market in European Union allows free movement of not only goods, services, money and people within the European Union, just like it is the one country. There are no quotas, there are no tariffs, there are no taxes on trade and regulations. The regulations pertain to all the 28 countries. It is a uniform regulation as far as packaging, safety, standards, everything is uniform across 28 countries. So, that is the beauty of single market. Then, if you look at the free trade area, there are several agreements among countries with regard to free trade area. Free trade area is entirely different. There is a vast difference between single market and free trade area, and free trade area is nowhere near single market. Free trade area means countries can trade with each other without paying tariffs, but certain trade restrictions on specific commodities may be there, certain exemptions on tariffs may be there, and imported goods have to comply with the laws of the land. But in this single market, it is one law which determines for all the 28 countries. Then deliberations or negotiations for free trade area takes several years. Quite often countries impose protectionist measures, but they are not there in single market. So, free trade area and single market, there is a huge difference. European Union is example of single market, and now the question is whether United Kingdom coming out of European Union by March 2019, whether it opts for this soft Brexit or hard Brexit. Hard Brexit means nothing, no connection with this single market. Soft Brexit means they will retain some of the traits of single market for some more years to come, right. The next one is single market versus customs union. Single market means within European Union we talked about free movement of people, goods, services, everything, and this is about EU single market. And if you look at the customs union, they have a common external tariff. That is the meaning of customs union. You see here, if a car is imported from Japan, suppose let us say Toyota car is imported to France, Toyota car is imported to UK, if there is import duty of 10%, it will be the same for all the 28 countries. So, if import duty of 10% is imposed by France, same 10% will be imposed by UK also. So, this is the meaning of customs union. So, here abolish restrictions on mutual trade, common system of tariffs and import quotas for non-members. This is very, very important. Members cannot negotiate with the third country. You see, if something is imported from Japan to France, then France cannot negotiate with the third country. That means they cannot continue negotiations with Japan, and everything will be taken care of by European Union. So, the import duties among the 28 countries when the products are coming from the third country will be the same. That is the meaning of customs union. So, now before concluding this, what is hard Brexit? What is a soft Brexit? And what are its implications? What is hard Brexit? Hard Brexit means totally giving up it full access to the single market. Just come out of single market, just come out of customs union, then you are regulated by WTO rules as applicable for independent countries. So, it will prioritize complete control of Britain over its borders. It will make its own trade rules, nothing to do with European Union as far as single market or customs union is concerned. So, what does it mean for UK? As I have already told you, this hard Brexit, it will facilitate United Kingdom making a global trading nation. So, there is an impression that hard Brexit is there, then UK can rise and it will become global trading nation, and at the same time it could see British goods and services subjected to tariffs, right. So, some of the sectors could lose protection against cheap imports from abroad. We have seen customs union, that means all the 28 countries will have single tariff, but now that will be lost. UK is required to negotiate with various third countries, right. So, what is soft Brexit? Soft Brexit example is, please understand, some countries like Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein, they are not members of European Union. That means a soft Brexit example can be just like what the countries like Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein are doing. Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, they are not members of European Union, but have access to single market, that is known as European Economic Area or EEA. So, this type of arrangement UK can think of, and if this type of arrangement is thought of by UK, then it is example of soft Brexit, please do not forget. So, UK's relations with European Union will be as close as possible with the existing arrangements. So, UK without being a member of European Union can keep some of the existing arrangements like unfettered access to European single market, right. So, what are the repercussions? The repercussions of soft Brexit is that maintaining proper connections with EU trading arrangement is a matter of national interest. It is in the national interest. Some people say hard Brexit could damage the economy, and London's position as a financial hub will be dealt a severe blow if United Kingdom left the single market. Because of these arguments, some people prefer soft Brexit. Only time can say on which way UK will go by the time it leaves European Union by March 2019. So, in a nutshell, before conclusion, the difference between hard Brexit and soft Brexit: hard Brexit leaves everything behind, no single market access, no customs union, tight controls with EU, just like any other country. Soft Brexit is keeping some aspects of single market, individual deals, financial trade deals, some sort of free movement with the European Union. I hope you are crystal clear about what is free trade area, what is a single market, what is customs union, what is a soft Brexit, what is a hard Brexit. Let us move on to the third one, BRICS off the wall. Here next BRICS summit is going to be held in China. Our Prime Minister will be in China during September 1st week to attend the BRICS summit, and here a question is, elaborate the contradictions among the two major nations of BRICS which are coming in the way of furthering the aspirations of emerging economies in BRICS. BRICS basically, what is the rationale behind BRICS? BRICS was started basically the economic mandate or the development paradigm devised by World Bank and IMF is not fully suitable for developing countries or emerging economies. Emerging economies or developing countries require a different paradigm of development. With that in motto, these 5 countries, initially 4 countries, subsequently joined by South Africa, came together so as to establish this BRICS group to further the aspirations of developing countries or emerging economies. The fundamental point to note is the financial methodology, or you can say the economic growth paradigm designed by IMF and World Bank. They are not fully apt for the aspirations or the difficulties in growing the developing countries, or you can say they are not 100% apt for emerging economies. Under these circumstances, the birth of BRICS took place, but now there are several contradictions which are most likely to put the brakes on the progress of BRICS paradigm. About BRICS, it was initially coined, the word BRIC was coined by Jim O'Neill of investment bank Goldman Sachs, probably in 2001. Subsequently, this was formed and South Africa became another member. And at the time of constitution, what was the basic idea? I have written here. The basic idea was that these emerging economies require a different set of economic order, as challenges faced by emerging economies are entirely different from those conceptualized by Bretton Woods institutions of IMF and World Bank. The world order, or you can say the world growth paradigm, as well as the world economic order, is written by IMF and World Bank, that is not apt for the developing countries. With that in mind, different paradigm is to be developed, and with that context, this BRICS originated. The 5 countries constitute around 40 to 45% of global population and 22 to 23% of global GDP, and these are situated in 4 continents. That is the beauty of BRICS. And the 9th summit is going to be held in Xiamen, China in September 17. Please look into this map. These are BRICS countries, and 5 countries, the ground realities are different. Probably the contradictions emerge from different ground realities. More contradictions are there between India and China among the BRICS countries. Now Russia is somewhat coming closer to China, and Brazil, it is suffering because of its own political problems now at this present juncture. So let us see one country by country. China and India have got border disputes, and most important aspect is China is trying to create its own world order, and Belt and Road Initiative is one classic example, and it's a massive investments not only in Indian Ocean region, in several countries is a classic example that China is trying to establish its mark with the own world order. This is evident when it discarded Arbitration Tribunal's award in South China Sea case, and it is pushing aggressively through BRI, not only BRI, massive investments in several countries. China has grown much faster pace of around 10%, 8%, something like that for around 25 years, and now the growth is around 6.5% or so. India is worried about China's close relationship with Pakistan, and the classic case is this CPEC is passing through POK region, that is India's main worry. Russia is beset at its own problems. Russia, several sanctions exist over Russia by Western countries as well as or you can say several sanctions exist on Russia by Western countries on Crimea issue, and Russia is under recession in recent times because of fall in global oil prices as well as sanctions imposed by West. So, under these circumstances, it is even reaching out to countries like Pakistan. Then you see China and Russia are becoming closer. Brazil is suffering because of political turmoil, very important. Then South Africa is beset with corruption problems and its economy is not doing well. Of course, the bright sign is new development bank was set up by BRICS and started functioning from 2015, and as per the news reports, it already approved loans totaling $6 billion in BRICS countries, and at the same time contingent reserve arrangement was also made operational. That means if any of the BRICS country have got some problems pertaining to currency, then contingent reserve arrangement will come into picture and it will supplement the efforts of International Monetary Fund. So, this is all about 5 countries, different ground realities. You see the 5 nations, bonds or contradictions. If you look at Brazil, Brazil is not part of Belt and Road Initiative, but you see China Brazil Infrastructure Fund is announced, which is worth $20 billion. Then if you look at Russia, it is important part of Belt and Road Initiative and it is coming closer to China. If you look at India, there are several contentious issues between India and China. These are the issues we have discussed previously, starting from the bonds between India and USA, which is not palatable to China, right up to Dalai Lama issues, stapled visas for Arunachal residents. So, these are the issues which India is not happy about with China. Then recently Doklam issue. Then if you look at China, China wants to establish its own world order, we have already seen, and it is coming up with the ambitious Belt and Road Initiative and massive investments in various countries. If you look at South Africa, it is important part of Belt and Road Initiative. So, these are the bonds or contradictions. Then we have already seen this, let us go ahead. Most likely fallout are contentious issues. You see, this summit is going to be held in the first week of September. What are going to be the most contentious issues or which are going to be somewhat which may cause unpleasant situation for India? You see, China will bring the BRI in the joint statement. In fact, it brought the issue of Belt and Road Initiative in the joint statement of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and now there is every possibility in the BRICS conclave this China can bring this BRI or Belt and Road Initiative in the joint statement. The endorsement of the statement pertaining to BRI most likely to become tricky issue as far as India is concerned. How India will sign that joint statement when this Belt and Road Initiative, or you can say CPEC, part of Belt and Road Initiative, is passing through Jammu and Kashmir, right. The second one is China is coining another word, BRICS plus or Friends of BRICS grouping. It wants to add 3 more countries. There is no problem with regard to Sri Lanka or Mexico, and it wants to bring Pakistan into this BRICS plus. That is not acceptable to India. Probably India may think about it. So, inclusion of Pakistan in the proposed BRICS plus may not be acceptable to India. Then the third issue is friendship between Russia and China. In recent times, Russia moved closer to China and away from India, you can say, and this may have its fallout in the joint statement. We have to wait and see what type of joint statement will be framed with regard to Afghanistan, because Russia is becoming closer to China. Russia's relations estranged as far as US and Europe are concerned because of Crimea issue in Ukraine, and there is also an important project, $300 billion Russia-China pipeline, and this is funded by China. So, under these circumstances, China most likely to attract Russia also, just like magnet what attracted Pakistan, right friends. The next one is with regard to Afghanistan policy of US, and here there is every possibility Russia, China, Iran and Pakistan may be on one side, because nowadays relations between Pakistan and United States of America are strained a lot. Under these circumstances, India may go towards US, NATO and countries like Japan, whereas this Russia, China, Iran and Pakistan may be on one side. So, another important aspect is at both the BRICS conference in Goa last year October as well as at Heart of Asia summit in December, Russian officials came in support of Pakistan. In fact, they could not agree to the strong language on terrorism by India against Pakistan. So, all these things are clear point that there were several contradictions within BRICS grouping which are coming in the way of furthering the cause of this developing countries, or you can say emerging economies as a whole, right. So, now Doklam became history, or you can say at least for the time being, and it remains to be seen how the two major economies in the BRICS group as well as two most populous countries of BRICS will chart their further course of action. Right friends, let us go to the fourth article, powering aspirational India. From statistics perspective, this article is very important, and by the mid of the century, India's dependence on fossil fuels will still be substantial. Illustrate in detail supporting this argument. People are talking about renewable energy sources like solar, wind, all those things, but here important point to notice, as per this article, India's dependence on fossil fuel based energy will still be substantial. At present, our per capita consumption of electricity is 800 units per annum, or you can say daily average Indian individual is consuming 2 units of electricity a day. Our daily consumption is 2 units of electricity. If the unit cost is rupees 5 or rupees 6, we are paying every day on an average rupees 10 or rupees 12 on electricity charges. Our per capita consumption is 800 units. Now, it is expected to go up to 5,000 units by 2050 because of aspirational youth, because of aspirational middle class. They want comfortable lifestyle, they want air conditioning, they want other electrical gadgets, and because of all these things, during the next 33 years, the per capita consumption of electricity per annum will go up from 800 to 5,000, right. Here you see India world energy consumption. This is as per International Energy Agency, Paris based organization. As per the data for 2014 published by International Energy Agency, average global per capita electricity consumption is, as an average across the world, if you see, the consumption is 3000 units, whereas for our country it is 800 units. If you look at developed countries of OECD, it is 8000 units. So, see the paradox, the energy consumption, or you can say electricity consumption in India is a 1/10 of electricity consumption in OECD countries, and the corresponding figure for Singapore is 8,000 units, Malaysia 4,000 units, Thailand 2,500 units, in our country, it is 800 units. This is as per the calculation of International Energy Agency and the figures pertaining to 2014. And now if you calculate for 2017 and if you calculate from Indian perspective, it may come maybe 1100 or so, but as per this IEA figures, average consumption is 800, and whereas for advanced economies it is 8000, global average is 3000 per person per annum. This is the electricity consumption. So by the middle of the century, the global average per capita consumption is going to be 7500 units. You can use these statistics whenever you are writing some question, and there is also an argument that technological efficiencies may improve, and because of energy conservation as well as technological improvements, these figures may not be that much. There are some differing views. As emphasis on energy conservation and improvement in energy efficiency of industry and household gadgets will help in reducing the electricity consumption. Certainly, the electricity consumption will be reduced because of technological improvements, no doubt about it. But even after considering technological improvements, there is no possibility to come down below 5000 units as far as India is concerned. In spite of that, means these technological improvements bound to take place, and even after considering the technological improvements like efficiency of the gadgets like air conditioners, refrigerators, lights, etc., but even then the energy consumption per capita is expected to be 5000 units per capita per annum in India by 2050. So here the population is going to be 1.6 billion or 160 crores. At present, the population is 130 crores. And here you see, let us assume that the transmission and distribution losses, at present transmission and distribution losses are around 15-20%, and as the efficiency increases, it may come down to 7%. So India must generate 8600 billion units. That means 160 crore population, 7% transmission losses. If you consider all these things, and to have 5000 units per capita to the citizens, so each and every citizen to have 5000 units per capita per annum, then India must generate 8600 billion units. And you see, in India, the cumulative average growth rate during the past 10 years was just 6%, and Indian generation is 1242 billion units. We are talking about utilities, and there may be power generated by non-utilities. What is the meaning? Utilities means we are getting electricity from the power generation company or power distribution company. We are utilities. Non-utilities means some industry may have their own captive power plant. They are not asking power from the electricity grid. So some industry which has its own captive power plant, that is known as non-utilities. So non-utilities may be around 10%. Utilities production is 1242 billion units. If you add non-utilities, it comes to 1410 billion units. You see, at present 1400 billion units, right? And what is required? We require 8600 billion units by 2050. So in a nutshell, at present 1400 billion units power generation is there. So by the year 2050, we require 8600 billion units. This is all about this article. The initial figures that were based on International Energy Agency, and these are as per the calculation from Indian energy perspective of 2017. We are looking at billion units. At present, we are producing 1400 billion units, and the requirement by 2050 is 8600 billion units. So here the electricity generation for 2050 must be 6 times the total generation, or you can say 4.5 times per capita generation, because population also will increase by 2050. So, the power generation in a nutshell, as on date 1400 billion units, we require 8600 billion units. So, 6 times capacity generation is required. So, is the target of per capita and availability of 5000 units is realistic? Absolutely realistic, because you see, because of several reasons. One is the percentage share of electricity in total energy consumption. The percentage of share of electricity in the total energy consumption is increasing day by day. That is one part. As per the estimates of International Atomic Energy Agency, the share was 35% in 2015, and it is projected to increase to 52% by 2050. So, it is talking about Middle East and South Asia. So, one fundamental point here is the share of electricity in the total energy mix is increasing. It is going to be 52% by 2050 when you look at the Middle East as well as South Asia. At the same time, government is going for electricity for all, housing for all, infrastructure development, make in India, electrification of transport. All these things government is doing. So, they calls for more electricity on a reliable basis. So, therefore, at present 800 units, and it will certainly go up to this 5000 units by 2050. It is a realistic figure. So, can our youth return back to frugal way of living? Certainly not. Now, aspirational middle class, aspirational youth, they require quite a comfort. Everyone want air conditioning in houses as well as in the workspaces. Air conditioning is becoming necessity. So, considering all these aspects, given the basic amenities, ordinary Indian will become an aspirational Indian. You see, once the basic amenities are available, an ordinary Indian will become aspirational Indian. So, what about alternate sources? Last year, hydroelectricity generation was 122 billion units. So, we must maximize the use of low carbon sources like hydropower, variable renewable energy. What is this variable renewable energy? Variable renewable energy is wind power, solar power and nuclear power. So, the author says that to reach the target of 8600 billion units, we have to maximize the use of low carbon energy sources like hydropower, variable energy, variable renewable energy as well as nuclear power. So, what about solar and wind? As per the Niti Aayog report, solar and wind power potential was estimated as maximum, we are talking about 705 gigawatt, sorry 750 gigawatt and 302 gigawatt respectively for solar power and wind power. So, here if you assume a load factor of 20%, because the load factor in solar and wind power are limited. What is the reason? The reason is they are seasonal in nature. Because of seasonal in nature, the plant load factor will be quite low for solar as well as wind powers. So, assuming 20%, it can generate only 1840 billion units. We have already seen 8600 billion units is required, but the maximum potential appears to be 1840 billion units, and this problem can be solved if low cost batteries, if they can store electrical energy or wind energy, then of course more and more power can be made available. So, here all these rough estimates, that means these are all rough estimates, hence the total possible generation from hydropower, variable renewable energy can be at best 1/4 of 8600 billion units. So, the point to note here is all the renewable energy sources can contribute hardly 1/4 of the total energy requirement by 2050, and because of this the share of electricity generated by nuclear power must be increased. So, there are 3-4 aspects to reduce the footprint of fossil fuel based power by 2050. There are 3-4 aspects. One is the share of electricity generated by nuclear power can be increased by weighing all the pros and cons. Then second thing is large investments must be made in research and development in electricity storage technologies, very important. This variable renewable energy, this is in fact can become much more fruitful, can become much more efficient when proper electricity storage technologies are available, and research and development must go towards this electrical batteries, then or you can say electricity storage batteries. Then until installed capacity based on low carbon sources picks up, fossil fuels may have a substantial role. So, final word is, under these circumstances, Cabinet note for the construction of 10 indigenous power plants, nuclear power plants, as well as Kudankulam units 3 to 6, and at the same time completing all the steps towards operationalization of nuclear cooperation agreement are the steps in the right direction. The author is talking about only nuclear energy here because he is a nuclear energy expert, but a lot more needs to be done in the battery storage technologies as far as solar and wind power is concerned. So, the need of the hour is optimize the utilization of power with improvised devices or efficient electronic gadgets. That is the first point. Second point is give more emphasis on hydropower as well as give more emphasis on solar and wind powers. At the same time, please look at battery storage capacities of solar and wind powers, and after weighing all the options, go for nuclear power. So, these are some of the methods required so as to reduce the fossil fuel footprint. Otherwise, fossil fuel footprint may not be reduced substantially in the near future also, because of huge requirement of power by 2050 and the limitations of electric power as well as wind power as on date. But in my opinion, more and more scientific and technological breakthroughs may come up in the future, especially in the storage technologies, especially in the newer sources of power, especially in the cost reduction as far as solar energy is concerned. And because of all these things, we cannot predict at this juncture, but author strongly feels that fossil fuel footprint may not reduce much even by 2050. That is his viewpoint. Let us look at the last article. This is managing the embankments, very important article. You can have this question. There is a need for community based management of flood embankments. We have seen community based irrigation, we have seen community based forest management, and the need of the hour is community based management of flood embankments. Critically examine this proposal. Then another thing is we have to shift from reactive flood protection to year round flood governance comment. Nowadays, more and more floods are taking place. The rainfall incidences, that is incidence of rainfall or huge incident rainfall days are increasing. That is one aspect. And the second point is embankments are breached at number of locations. So, to manage the flood embankments, the need of the hour is to go for community based management. Right? What is the meaning of community based management? The meaning of community based management is the management of flood embankments can be entrusted to the local population. Right? What is being happened? I do not want to take much time. You have seen all these things at several locations. Embankments are being breached in various states, and at the same time recently Kishanganj, Katihar districts, here the floods cut off the road and rail services So, like that several breaches are taking place. So, breach of embankment we are talking about. Then what are these embankments? I am going point by point. These embankments are, please look into this picture. This is example of embankment. An embankment is an uplifted earthen structure constructed along the river channel. In fact, it constricts, that means it prevents the further extension of the flow of water, it reduces the width of the channel, it prevents the flow of water beyond the embankment. So, it constricts flood waters to a narrower stretch, it reduces the size of the flood plains. What is flood plain? If this embankment is not constructed, then this water will go this side. So, this is all flood plain, you can say. The flood plains water in fact controlled by the construction of embankments. Please understand these words carefully. What is embankment? What is the flood plain? This is embankment, the wall constructed, or you can say the raised embankment. If this raised embankment is not there, sorry, this water will go this side. So, this is known as the flood plain. So, the land outside the embankment is supposed to be safe from floods. The meaning of constructing this embankment is the area outside that must be protected, right. So, what is the present system of management of this flood plains? These are in fact crisis management. Once the embankments are constructed, normally government officials does not look at them. If at all these repairs are done, they are somewhat based on crisis. Whenever there is any complaint, then this flood embankment repairs are undertaken. These embankments are managed by irrigation or flood control departments of the governments, that is one part. Several times a breach of these embankments occur here. Poor management as well as failure to attend the areas in times of emergency resulted in frequent breach of embankments. What can be the way out? The way out is the communities near the embankments can be entrusted to manage them. That means the responsibility of embankment management can be given to the people in the near vicinity or the communities. The ownership can be with the government, but the management can be given to the community as a whole. Then what are the anticipated differences or difficulties? The anticipated difficulties are the communities are divided on caste, class and religion lines. The communities are divided on caste, subcaste, class and religion lines, but they may come together because of one sole reason, because of if some flood occurs, all of them will be affected. The disaster is non-discriminatory and it affects all. Because of that reason, probably people may come together, but there must be an institutional mechanism to incentivize for the collective action, but institutional framework must be instituted. So, how to manage the embankments? Some thought process has given by the author. The embankment management committees can be empowered. This embankment management committees, that means the communities near the embankment can be given this task of managing the embankments, and they can collect toll over the roads, because these roads are used by villagers. So, toll can be collected for using the roads. Of course, the amount may be less, but it is significant and it can be used for maintaining the flood embankment. Second point is the plantation can be undertaken on these flood banks, flood embankments I am talking about. So, with the plantation, the embankment management committees can get some revenue out of it through the sale of a harvest. And in areas where villages exist on both the sides of the embankment, more revenue can be given to the insiders because they are the worst affected. So, what should be the institutional mechanism? There must be some institutional mechanism. The mechanism is the irrigation or flood control departments can issue tenders for periodic maintenance activity, and the committees could act as a partner to partly implement the same. That means these committees could act as a partner to implement the same guidelines, whatever are issued by the government, or the village embankment committees can act as monitoring agency. Payment to contractors could be conditions upon joint inspection by both the government department as well as this embankment management committees, so that this embankment management committees can be in fact better useful to protect their own environments, and they will show much more interest because of this embankment management committees. Their effective functioning in fact will benefit the communities directly. So, what is the final word? Promote decentralized management systems, and for embankment management these can be tested as proposed by the author, and moreover build and forget cannot be an option for embankments. In fact, participatory irrigation we have seen among the communities, and joint forest management we have also seen among the communities, and now we can think of this participatory management of flood embankments. So, the final word is we have to shift from reactive flood protection to year round flood governance. So, if that is the goal, we must design ways of embankment management in flood prone areas, and this participatory embankment management can be the way forward. Right friends, this concludes today's editorial discussion. We are presenting SBI PO modules today and tomorrow at 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. Please join for SBI PO live sessions at 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. today and tomorrow, that is on 31st August and 1st September. And this concludes today's editorial discussion. Yesterday we have uploaded modules pertaining to why and how as well as PIB. S&T related current affairs will appear today, and weekend modules will appear on Saturday. And with this, let us conclude editorial discussion. We will meet tomorrow morning, same time, 11:30. Have a nice day. Thank you.